So small group today, which is not my problem. Maybe it is a problem later for those who had not been here. I was getting today aware of something during the first lecture. The curtains had been closed and somebody switched on the light. They had not been completely closed, but somebody switched the light on, switched more light on. And I was thinking, linked to a recent experience, about something how we are living in an environment and we are shaping the environment and we are adapting to the environment. We are used to artificial light now, and we use it. And we complain about problems with energy and waste of energy and environmental protection issues. But we use the light even if we just could open the curtains, which personally I think is a more pleasant light as well. And possibly the reason, or one of the reasons that I was getting aware of it, is something that is very fundamentally important for economics, and showing up in very different terms. Alienation, use value and exchange value, and a market that gets independent of what we use, for what we use it. And we are kind of complaining everything is determined by machines and robots and whatsoever. And I can just back my beautiful airport experience when I have too much time basically and look around. And there was one of these things, I don't know how they are called, where there are 4 options: smiley, happy with the service, down to the 4th category, it was not up to standard. And what happened, if you go back, we talked about it, was immediate exchange. We have not commodities, but we have goods, and I need something, you have something, and we arrange to exchange them. And there we got the immediate feedback. Somebody was smiling. Somebody was complaining, don't do this is too much, or whatsoever. And then we know actually, since some time, in different places, I went later to the police station, I always have to register when I'm coming here. I saw one of these little things standing on the desk. How was the service? Happy, not happy. As I said, I saw this in Helsinki on the airport. Now, there was one remarkable thing. The assessment was not about the assessment of a service, but the assessment was one of a robot. Basically, this automatic check-in things. Some of you remember the film, Ex Machina? We talk about modern times, I mentioned it in one of the lectures, where machines take over. They determine the rhythm. So what you have in technology, you have as well in terms of market processes, that they are increasingly determined not by the use value, that we exchange to use something, but they are determined by something that is outside of this. Just a brief recapitulation to come basically back to what we are talking about in a very fundamental thing. And this is something you can really say it's a general issue. We find this in very different societies. In highly developed societies, in other societies that are not even capitalist societies. There you would use different terms, but we have households, we have individuals, we have workers on the one side, and then we have this circle on the other side, we have firms that are actually producing. So you have, if you want to use this term, you have the use value here, at least this is the main thing. They don't buy anything just because they are happy to buy, but they want to use it. Whatever the use is, we'll come back to it later. And here you have the firms, they are not interested in producing use value. They only produce use value because otherwise you won't buy it. And the same with a producer, with a worker. He produces something that is a good, that is tangible, or that can be used. A service as well. A service, you know what it is about. A health service is there because you feel sick, you feel weak, you don't feel good, or you want to change your face. And this is, you go to avail of the service, you buy it, and then you have here, now we are talking about capitalist, well, not necessarily, means of labor, the means of this productive process, the factor market. And of course you have here one of the things, at the end it's always the worker who produces something for this market that can be used in the firms. Machines are produced by workers. And the worker herself goes into the firm, into the institution and works, produces. And then you have here the exchange with a finished product. Something is produced, the service is available, and that goes back into another market, the market for goods and services. And there you have the finished product which is consumed. So production, consumption. This is a circle. And of course you will find a kind of equilibrium. This is the idea of the entire thing. Don't produce more than is consumed. And you will not be able to consume more if it's not produced. So this is a very fundamental principle of an economic process, circularity. Production and consumption going hand in hand together and striving for some kind of equilibrium. This equilibrium is a very difficult thing, very complex thing at the end of the day, because you have, of course, crisis, which is not equilibrium. You have power involved, forcing you to buy something or withholding it. So it's not this automatic process of equilibrium comes automatically, but this is the fundamental idea. Then we talked as well about another fundamental issue of development. In a way you can say, I mentioned it before with a reference to technology, which is part of it, but it is as well about what are we consuming, what makes our life, how do we produce and reproduce our life. And of course at very early stages, you have the primary sector. It's about raw material and it's about farming products. So usually you find in many textbooks primary activities is farming. It's hunting. So you would have here the production extracting something from nature. As I said, it's getting less, but it's getting less only in relation to the overall economy, in terms of the role it plays in the overall process of production. Of course, we produce more foodstuff than we did 100 years ago. But 2 points. On the one hand, we produce with different means. We are more efficient to produce. We have better machines. So we need less input to have more output. And at the same time, the other sectors grow to such an extent that the relative part of this activity goes down, diminishes. The second development is the industrial part, production of goods and commodities. And of course, you find them always somewhere. There's always some production of tools, of basic tools. But it is increasing. Again, in relative terms, and here in absolute terms. At early stages, you did not have the choice, your personal choice, of having, I don't know how many shirts, how many pairs of shoes, and whatever you name it. You have had one, or you may have had two to change it, but you did not have, I don't know, this one ridiculous person who has 200 pairs of shoes or something. This is something nobody did have. There was not even the idea of having so much. Now this increased, and there are new products, means of transport, computers which we didn't know 40 years ago, things like this, as well essentials. Just see, glasses. We didn't know it. When we had been blind, we had been blind. Perhaps there was somebody still getting us somewhere, but we didn't have this. And then you have the tertiary activities, which is services. This is how we distribute things, how we administer things. Very important and an increasing part of the overall economy. Meaning today, even if this is not completely true, today everybody can avail of education. As I said, it's not everybody really, but if you look at the number of people who avail of education, of basic education, of higher education, third level education, and going on, it's amazing if you compare this with earlier stages. You didn't have even schools because there had not been a sufficient number to go to school. This was something I, as a very rich person, could buy. I have had a private teacher buying the service for my kids, and that was it. There were no public schools. There had been public education or something, but not in this kind of a high-level sector. And then you have the quaternary and quinary sector, which we leave out now here, because at this stage it's not really important. It is important insofar that there are certain parts, especially of the tertiary sector, that are getting even more distant from the basic educational, basic productive process. So this is overall part, that you have this line of immediate production and reproduction of what we need towards something you could say it's, on the one hand, more luxurious. It's going beyond the basic needs of something that allows us to survive. And with this, you have as well an increasing distancing from the immediate productive process. If I have my plants in the garden, if I have my animals and rear up cattle, basically I can go there and get them onto the table. In case of doubt, raw vegetable, I can get it out of the ground and can eat it. Now I have ready-made food. I put it into the microwave. Somebody, of course, did all this work, but it's not something that is immediately a main part of this overall process of production. It is very simple, but it is something that is frequently forgotten when we talk about economic analysis in daily life. We just forget it, especially we forget it, that these are only relative values. As I said, we are producing more foodstuff than we did 100 years ago. But the way in which we produce makes it possible to be more productive, which has influence on the price, which has influence on the amount of production, which has influence of who can avail of it. Now there's a different way of approaching this. A different way of approaching this means we are again dealing with the same question of looking at the overall economy and looking at what is produced, how it is produced, and trying to find different segments of the overall process. So we have here the first and foremost two departments with which everything starts. This is the core of production, if you want. And this is where we start. We start with production. We are not starting with consumption. This is going hand in hand, and we produce the means of production to be able to produce something that we can consume. Be aware of it that talking about the means of production is something that is going beyond things that come immediately to our mind, saying means of production, that's machines and all this. Go back to the term of productive factors of production. We produce the soil. Even if the soil as such is there, but we make it to some soil that we can use to plant whatever we want to plant. Fertile ground. Fertile ground as such is not completely given. We produce this. And then, of course, we produce at some stage robots that seemingly work independent of us. As I said, first, means of production, then production of consumables. That's what we consume, that's what we use, what we need, whatever the need is. And then it was, especially in the 1900s, 1910, 20, where people came up. This is actually going back to Karl Marx. He named this in this way. Department 3, it was Rosa Luxemburg and Hilferdink, I forgot the name, who said there is something new. We had been dealing with money for a long time. There had been finances involved for a long time. This is not new. But now, this is so important in the overall process. It's actually independent, increasingly independent from these two departments. And we have a new department. Department 3, finances. Because if you go back, you have this immediate exchange, good against good. Now you have a developed stage where money enables us to be more effective, if you want, to exchange goods that we need. And at some stage, you have finances, and there is no good anymore. It's just dealing with finances. If you look back last crisis, it's kind of funny, kind of, if you don't think about the consequences. You have something that is in danger of being destroyed, meaning you have a credit, you have a loan, and this is not sufficiently secured. So I give you 10,000 yuan, but I don't know if you can pay back. So we insure this. And there is an insurance, of course we have to pay for it. This is something we have to deal with. I say you have to pay or I pay. So we insure this credit, but who guarantees that the insurance can actually pay if something goes wrong? So we have another insurance that insures the insurance, and we have another insurance that insures the insurance of the insurance, and so on and so on. And then you have rating systems. They get money for rating things, which they cannot rate it. If you go through the literature, it's all subjective. They admit it, but they still sell it to you. So it is something, it matters, of course, at the end of the day, but for some time you have a department that is independent. You just trade with air, with nothing, with something where I put 100 on it, and because I do it, it's 100. That's the only reason. And somebody else believes me. That's the important part. And then I would say we have now a stage, we reach now a stage where we have a fourth department, independent services, that are only very loosely connected to all these services before. You provide accounting services, that's always part of this process. You administer what you are doing. Ideally, finance services are as well part of, you make it possible to produce, get loans for production, get loans for consumption. At some stage, not anymore. And at some stage, you have services that are as well completely independent of the rest of the economy. Design, it's part of it, but some people just sell design and make a market for design. Not to design products, but arts is a typical part of it. You make arts, it's nice, it's beautiful, but you cannot say it is linked to this process of production. And if you look how much money is going into it, it's amazing. And all these many services you have today, from rent a babysitter and whatsoever, this is increasingly a sector that is getting independent of this core of the economy. And the core of the economy, coming back to this, is the production of commodities. It's not, and you have to be aware of it and really get this into your head, commodities are not goods. This is a piece of chalk, and as such, it is only an object outside us, a thing that by its properties satisfy human wants of some sort or another. I can use it for writing, I can use it for drawing, or I can chew on it if I want. It's supposedly very healthy, actually, for the fingernails. And this is, first and foremost, outside of myself, and I can use it up to something I define. The nature of such wants, meaning what I want to do with it, whether, for instance, they spring from the stomach or from fancy, makes no difference. Neither are we here concerned to know how the objective satisfied these wants, meaning what I do with it and what I like to do with it, whether directly as means of subsistence or indirectly as means of production. You see, it's not just these fancy things, but as well if I use it for production. But as such, it is then getting to this commodity as iron, paper, chalk, etc., may be looked at from 2 points of view of quality and quantity. The quality is, what can I do with it? This is of interest for me. And of course, I have to look as well, how much chalk do I have? Is it sufficient for 1 hour, for 2 hours, or for the day? Or do I have to call somebody to get new chalk? The quantity is what is relevant for the market. How much can be sold? How much can I put into the market, into this process of circulation? Then we come to this decisive thing of a thing can be a use value without having value. And this is basically the idea of, is it only about a use value, or is it at the same time about an exchange value? This is the case whenever its utility to men, meaning what I can do with it, is not due to labor. Such are air, virgin soil, natural meadows, etc. A thing can be useful and the product of human labor without being commodity. Whoever directly satisfies his wants with the produce of own labor, creates indeed use values, but not commodities. In order to produce the latter, meaning commodities, he must not only produce use values, but use values for others. So there you find the decisive shift towards exchange. It's not producing for my own sake, for my own use, but now I produce for the market. In order to produce the latter, he must not only produce use values, but use values for others, social use values. Somebody else respects this as something I can use. I produce it and you say, yes, it is useful. To become a commodity, a product must be transferred to another, whom it will serve as use value by means of an exchange. There is the money. The money helps me to do the transfer, because I'm not dealing with one individual, but I'm dealing with one individual, but I want the stuff somebody else, a third person or a fourth person or 106th person has. So this is where money comes into play. And lastly, nothing can have value without being object of utility. If it's completely useless, nobody will acknowledge it and say, yes, I buy it. Whatever the use is, as you found in this quote, it's for fancy. I like it. That's use value. If the thing is useless, so is the labor contained in it. The labor does not count as labor and therefore creates no value. One of the important parts of this is, it is about labor that creates value, that transforms something into something that is valuable. We talked about it, and it is necessary, it was necessary to repeat it, because it is a central issue of the entire economic thinking, and it is an essential thing that is frequently not dealt with. Now coming more to the formulas, how does it work? On the one hand, we say the development is from a stage where we have this immediate exchange. Now we have this shift to something that is not the immediate exchange, but where people want to get more and get more than they put into the circle. Going back to the quote before, it's labor that produces value. But how do we get to this labor? Meaning it depends, in this case, on an inequality of the productive factors. There we talk about accumulation, that you put something into the process of production, you start produce, you start laboring, and you produce more than you actually use. You produce a surplus, because otherwise you cannot exchange it. If you need everything you produce, you cannot exchange it. Going on then, you produce as private owner of means of production. And this is the primitive accumulation, or original accumulation, where you get hold of property. And we talked about the commons. The commons had been there for everybody. Everybody could use, for instance, the grassland or the forest. You could go there, you brought your cattle there, you got the cattle back, well fed, and you used the milk for yourself. Now we come historically to what is called enclosure. Enclosing some part of it and saying, this belongs to me. You are not allowed to use this part. It's an act of violence. I put a fence around it and say, that's it, it's mine. You find it in Karl Marx, you find it in Adam Smith. So it's a kind of consensus amongst the political spectrum, if you want. And then you find somebody else saying, this is my part. And then you find somebody else saying, this is my part. And the commons is getting smaller and smaller. And you have this shift to private production. The private ownership of means of production, in this case, soil. And this happens as well, and in consequence, with machines. Because I need some property to build other property on it. So this is accumulation. Have something and get more out of it. If I have this already, I can be stronger. I lived once in Austria. And these are mountains. There was a relatively narrow valley. What happens, the farmers here had been relatively rich. The farmers here had been relatively poor. Because this is the fertile soil. Here it is kind of easy to do farming. If you do it here on a steep mountainside, it's pretty difficult. So just get hold of this, and then you can be more productive. So the people here, this is the way of literally seeing it. The people here, they built hotels from the money they made from farming. They built large B&Bs, and they couldn't do it because they didn't have resources. Only small B&Bs, a little bit farming, and a little bit, they didn't have enough ground there that they could deal with. And then you get richer and richer and richer, and at some stage you own Austria. Literally you do. Well, not Austria, but you own more and more. Accumulation. What is important, looking at this, we are not talking about money. Money is useless. Money doesn't have any value. Money is a piece of paper or piece of metal, and somebody says this has the value of so and so. Looking at it in the extreme, it is really not more. It's only more because the government says this is 100 yuan, and I guarantee that it is 100 yuan. You can come to the bank and with this piece of paper, and it is a means of exchange, means for exchange. You buy something, or I buy something from you, I give you 100 yuan, and you can go with these 100 yuan to buy something else, because it is guaranteed these 100 yuan. If I give you a piece of paper and write 100 yuan, there is no guarantee. So this is the state guaranteed, if you want state guaranteed, money value. As such, it doesn't have money. It has only money because I can use it for exchange, and somebody guarantees the value of it. In principle. There's inflation and these things, but in principle it is this. Capital is something different. Capital is that part of the money, if you want, that is invested in means of production. If I'm very rich in terms of money, having huge amount of money, and I spend it for nothing, for 200 pairs of shoes and for a private aircraft and for a fancy car and I don't know what, and go for concerts, this is not capital. I'm money rich, but this does not mean I have capital. Capital is private property or public property invested in means of, here we are, production, not consumption. This is the difference. Money for consumption, capital for production. Hugely important, this difference. You can contest, you can discuss what is wealth. If you have money, you are wealthy, you are rich. If you have money and buy means of production, you are kind of richer because this guarantees you some further income to some extent. Now we are talking about using these abbreviations. C is not for capital, but for commodity. So this is what is produced to be exchanged. And money, not being capital, is here with a short, just with the letter M. I emphasize because sometimes it is used as well, C for capital. So be aware of it, what you are talking about. It's depending on the context. Now, the original state is the exchange commodity against commodity. I have something, you have something, and we exchange. I give you part of what I have, you give me part of what you have, and we negotiate basically by looking at the label invested at the value. Having many people going into this process of exchange, I use money to make it possible to enter the exchange over long chains. first is person to person, the second is person to person to person, and so on and so forth. So I have this mediation by money. Mediation makes it possible that I don't have to look at the commodity as such, but the money is a generalized value or an expression of this generalized value. Now, what I want to do with this orientation on exchange is I want to get more. It's not just that I want to, I'm happy with getting back in terms of value what I invested, but now I want to get back more than I put into it. C apostrophe, which is still very much linked to the process of production of goods that are of immediate use. And then you have this turn where Department 3 actually gets independent. That's the first step. I'm interested not in getting more commodities, but I'm interested now in getting more money. Here, line 3, money has the function to allow the exchange of commodities. Here, the commodity has the function to be able to get more money out of this process. Usually we have, you find it in any textbook, these different profitable, these different gains. You have to be careful, it's not profit. This is not profit. You have profit coming from production. I invest in machines, I invest in means of production, and this means I can get more money out of it. Profit. Then I have rent, because actually I'm too lazy to do this, and I give you the land, you can work on it, but you have to pay rent. This is the basic way of rent. You find other rents as well. And then I actually don't have ground, soil anymore, but I have money, interest, capital gains. I get the money out of money. I invest the money into financial circulation. I have interest because you want the money, I have the money, I give it to you, and I say, give it back to me in 1 year's time, and you pay, I don't know, 5%. It depends on, but this is. Royalty is what makes people like me rich, or not. Royalty is basically what you get for patents, for writing books, for making films or whatsoever, to making photographs and exhibiting them. This is where you don't sell the product, meaning it's not the money I get from selling the book, but basically it is what the system, meaning the publisher, pays to me for every sold book. If you sell enough books and if you have a good contract with your publisher, you can get rich. And I say you can get rich, not to say that I'm still poor. The problem is for certain literature you get a huge amount of money. For certain other literature it's actually very difficult and you stay under the limits of royalties. So we stay in time now and we'll make a break.